Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Burnt Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Burnt Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
True dyed-in-the-wool software pros are a valuable breed in water, and Paul Hauffen is one of the best. A two-time entrepreneur, he sold his last company, Sedaru, and in a founding hiatus is bringing his enormous experience to bear, helping companies along their trajectory, partially as a BIV Venture Partner. Paul is a very wise man indeed, and his insights on building solid foundations for companies, the hard yards of especially early sales and reference building, and the traps that founders can fall into are second to none. We're so lucky to work with him. Please enjoy my conversation with Paul Hauffen. Paul, it is always such an enormous pleasure to see you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well, Tom. Likewise. So excited to participate in the fundamental molecule here.
Excellent. Well, it's been a long time in coming. You've been a venture partner for us for some time, and it's ridiculous that we haven't had your recorded thoughts down on TMF at the moment.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Now, we're going to get into your route into water, and then obviously I want to spend a lot of time with you on software and go-to-market in particular, but I want to begin in the middle, which is the first question to introduce us to your thinking is, what do you think the biggest mistake that founders make in terms of their go-to-market strategy, but also just practical action? Where do you think that founders most often go wrong?
Yeah, I think when a founder initially raises capital, it can be really exciting, and it's a celebratory moment for sure. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that a founder like out of the gate tends to make is allocating that capital towards longer term bets and getting kind of intoxicated with some of the marketing that can be addicting, because you're talking about yourself out there and you're really excited. So you're taking all of that momentum and that excitement into publishing your message and into shouting from the rooftops who you are, who you want to be. And, that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy eventually, so long as I think you provide proof points at every step of the way. So I think that might be the biggest mistake, is starting out high level, getting addicted to the marketing, and without really developing those proof points and demonstrating that your product is bringing value consistently to the customer. So, when selling that new product, the importance of establishing that product market fit, connecting your journey, connecting what you intend to build, and demonstrating, I think, a lot of appreciation and respect for the capital that you accepted along the way by creating that product, and that then resonates with customers that you have a lot of proof points with along the way. The customer not only was able to buy once, but then had to justify, yes, and rightfully so, and exercise kind of the resonance of the message in justifying the renewal. And as you buy and as you renew, you're continuing to get validation points that the product is in fact real. And then you can start feeling comfortable and excited about backing up the marketing.
Absolutely. It's such an interesting observation. One of the things we wrote in our beginning sort of blog of the year was never ever talk externally about headcount, least of all to your investors. Just no headcount ever. And the other thing that I think that people really should think about is just not celebrating fundraisers. I mean, sure, you can kind of raise a glass internally as a team, but
Right.
Do you think a lot of companies would be better off not announcing fundraising?
That's a great question. I can go either way on that. I do think it is exciting and it is a milestone. So personally, I don't mind, again, provided that it is one reference point. And as soon as we get that publication or that marketing or that press release out, we're going head down into figuring out exactly how this product is going to resonate with our customers. Because again, you can get carried away with presentations and conferences and all of these marketing expenses that at the end of the day don't really mean much until the customer is buying. You've tested pricing, you've tested your messaging, and you've validated that, this product is real. Then when you go back to investors at some point, if you're looking to secure that next round, you've developed those kind of proof points, you've developed that validation, and you have product market fit and the gross margin to demonstrate that you're there, gross margin profitable, positive, and you're ready to make more investments in the business to scale.
What kind of venture capital show is this when we're talking about things so archaic as gross margins? This is outrageous, Paul. Profitability, excuse me, outrageous. It's a really interesting point though, because I always wonder, like, who is this for? Like, most marketing should be, and especially in water, actually, like, should be pretty actually hard to notice, because in general, where customers are looking is not where the rest of us are looking. They're looking on trade show floors. They're looking in kind of relatively esoteric pieces of media. Maybe they're looking at LinkedIn. That's fine. But when you're saying, hey, we raised X, like, okay, what does that do for me? The only thing that I think it can be actually useful is for potential further capital raises, et cetera. Especially if you've got a shorter term time frame, it's good to get the kind of the views in and on and allowing, maybe your investors to take a bit of a lap because it is helpful for them. But there seems a mismatch.
I think these days it's easier to, I think from a marketing and a sales perspective, I like to think of it as familiarity, establishing familiarity, credibility, and trust. So, and I do think these days it's easier than ever to, share or to get exposure across the market with customers. You can use very inexpensive means to do this, LinkedIn posts, email campaigns. I wouldn't say conferences are necessarily the highest ROI for a founder, especially if you're planning on having a booth and sponsoring events and things like that, not necessary. But even just email campaigns, LinkedIn posts. I know with Sedaru, my previous business that we ended up selling, we would spend $3,000 or $4,000 a year to sponsor a repeating American Waterworks Journal ad. And just to establish that familiarity. So it would repeat once a month. And we felt confident, we felt comfortable. We heard back from many customers and relationships that they would come through the American Waterworks Journal. They would see ID modeling, my first company, they would see Sedaru. And they would recognize it, and they would see our tagline and, the sentence description of what we were trying to do. So that added familiarity. The logo, the description, the message kind of resonated with some pain that they were trying to solve. So when we made that first introduction, when we made that first call, when we saw each other on the conference exhibit floor, we already knew each other to some extent. So it made that familiarity. The door was open, and we approached it. We walk in with credibility. We listen again as to what their pain is, and we, set up a demo, and we kind of take it from there and proceed through the sales pipeline funnel.
Oh my God, we're going to come back to the whole kind of marketing and sales process because you're as close to it and you think as clearly as anybody that we know. But I want you to rewind now. So why did you elect to go into water? You're obviously a pretty exceptional kind of software entrepreneur. You could have been, pointing those particular skills at, any particular part of the market. But why water, and why did you go after specifically the software opportunity in water in the first place?
Why water? It's funny. I've been fascinated, with water since I was a kid. I remember when I was 7 or 8 years old, young, I would save those popsicle sticks that you eat ice cream from, and I would wait for the rain. And I live in Los Angeles, so it didn't rain very much.
Well, yeah.
So I had to. It was a long wait, and I'd have to
it's a lot of popsicle sticks.
Store up on popsicle sticks, right? So when it did rain, I'd run out to the top of the street, and I would drop the popsicle sticks in the gutter, and I would follow that popsicle stick as it kind of veered, bobbed, and weaved, within the ripples of water as it made its way through the debris and around the debris and then down into the storm drain. And I would wonder, and I didn't know then that was a storm. I didn't know that was curb and gutter, or even necessarily that the street had a slope that took it from top to bottom. But I was fascinated with the behavior of water and the journey of water, the conveyance of it. And then again, like, where was it going? So from a very early age, I always had this kind of connection with water. And then you fast forward to college, my major was civil engineering with an emphasis on fluid dynamics and urban system planning. So it was just kind of a match made to be. So I'm thankful that it feels like water found me, because it's now and it's been a critical global issue. When we look at all the climate and water challenges around us, like floods, like droughts, quality related issues, and billions of people around the world are not able to access clean water, it's a really important time, especially when it feels like water is starting to get the attention that it needs and is seeing critical mass. It's a really important time for us to lean in and to bring change. But when you say why and why software in the space, I think it comes down to really two core words for me that are very personal to me, and that's having an impact and being creative. So the opportunity to have a positive impact on someone else's day in business is super motivating to me. And the software allows you to do this repeatedly and at scale to me is remarkable. That's always been kind of a core driver. So I feel very close to that. And then I love being creative. I play the drums, I play the guitar, I love to write music. And I have kids now that follow in that, which is pretty fun. And I get really motivated by growth. I'm very competitive. I love building teams and awesome cultures that excel and deliver. So the idea that based on a massive problem that we've identified and an idea and a vision, and that we as a team can create a software that's unique to us, that's beneficial to others and how it makes their day better is so fulfilling to me as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as a business person. And lastly, from a business standpoint, and having run both software and consulting businesses, the valuation multiples on a software company's recurring revenue, that software recurring revenue, are vastly different and more exciting than those on consulting. So that was never really my why, my driving why, but the opportunity to build exponential value by way of equity is also certainly compelling.
Super interesting. So can you just walk us through the kind of the lily pads of from when you saw the opportunity in the market that you wanted to go after, and how did you think about formulating the product to deliver the value proposition that then became Sedaru? What was that early thought process like for you?
Yeah, delivering the product that was Sedaru. I mean, it was how we found the problem. Kind of starts with a little bit of my background, given the background that I had in hydraulic modeling and kind of digital twins and all these different disparate data sets together to pursue or to support water, wastewater systems operations and planning. I had a unique seat in the utility that allowed me to see that utilities were having a massive problem daily, and it was only getting worse with accessing data that they can do anything meaningful with. When I saw that problem, it became very close to me because we wanted to build these computer models, and every data request we had, it took forever. When we received the data, it was low quality. We're putting these models together that then are being used to make $1 million decisions, and the confidence that we had in those and just the process and that journey of getting that data, doing things with it made everything very challenging. So we thought then, what if we could create a system that could sit connections across the utility? And in that, we're providing data real time and predictive to users across the organization, anytime, anywhere, to help them make better, more informed decisions based on that data that now they'd have a lot more confidence in. And it was really interesting because right around that time, my previous company, ID Modeling, which was building these models, we got hit by the recession. So we were almost forced to be really reflective. This is around 2009-10, to be really reflective on the viability and the vulnerability of that business. It was a consulting business. And as you know, when we were deploying a project and when we were done with the project, there was no guarantee of recurring revenue there. So we had to be very reflective. We had to be critical of our business. And given the problems that we saw with utilities managing data, we thought there was an opportunity to build that platform, a software as a service platform that became Sedaru, that was see data run. So I was very fortunate in finding the right set of early founders, co-founders with me at that time. Together, my co-founder and I, Sri Sridhar, we developed this product marketing document, which was very clear. And we tried to get very detailed with where we wanted to go, why we wanted to go there, the problem that we're trying to solve. And as we built out the business, aligning with that messaging, when we established our first early customers, we continued to revisit that plan with what the customers needed and always tried to make sure that those were in sync. We continued to revisit it all the time with every new product feature release. And we made every new early customer part of that early journey. And when they provided that feedback, we took that feedback in, we let them know. We made an excuse, Tom. I think this is so key. We found excuses to interact and interface with our customers. When they made a request, submitted a request, we mocked up that request and set up a call with them and then asked them, is this what you mean? Is this what you're looking for? And if they said yes or no, regardless, it was an opportunity for us to build trust in that relationship. Eventually, we might have rolled out that feature that they requested. We let them know that they were now part of the product. And together we're building on this kind of connected path of growth. That was super important in building those early relationships that eventually then become references. Those customers that become part of that journey then are really excited to participate in webinars and become use cases and become positive referrals that then help kind of lower that cost of customer acquisition and build momentum around the business.
I really love that idea of building excuses to interact, kind of going out of your way to really spend face-to-face time with the customer. I've never heard it phrased like that. It's a really, really good idea. I'd actually like to take you earlier in the process. So obviously you had the benefit of founder market fit. This was an area that you had already been. You'd been working in it. You probably had kind of the burgeoning network, but obviously nowhere near as strong as it is now. How did you think about finding that first customer that was going to use the nascent platform? How did you make that happen?
Maybe real quick funny story. The first Sedaru contract and sale that was made was literally completed or agreed to off of a napkin, right? So as mentioned, pretty hard. We had this idea. We had existing relationships, and I think this is from a founder perspective who maybe even is new to this industry. Just to establish that familiarity, right? I think is really key. And again, it can be an email marketing campaign where maybe you can see all the clicks of those people that opened it. You can give them a call and start to test your message. Right? You find somebody that's interested in the pain that you're trying to solve. And you just continue to engage that discussion, listening, learning, and syncing along with the direction that you intend, that you envision for your product. Now, for myself, I had existing relationships. So we engaged those relationships. Again, we shared with the general manager of a utility here in Southern California. And we said, look, is this what you're talking about? We listened. We recognized that they had an explicit pain. We took out the napkin that we had with us from lunch. And we said, is this what you're talking about? And we brainstormed a little bit on that. And from that came a $40,000 contract. It was a consulting contract to build that out. But then based on how we built that out and how we delivered incrementally on that vision, the renewal happened. So the following year and subsequent years, it was recurring revenue. So you kind of repeat that motion with those customers that feel closest and most connected to the vision and the problem that you're trying to solve. You engage, you listen, you incorporate. I call this the customer inclusion loop, right? Because it's more than just listening to the customer, but it's also engaging, incorporating their feedback and making them aware that their feedback was important and that they're now part of that journey with you. And if you can find ways to repeat that loop, because initially that might feel like it's kind of that motion, that relationship building and building out trust like that, it might feel like it gets in the way of scale. But I think if you can find ways from the founder into the team to help develop that, exercise that, automate that, you're going to be on the right track with not only product market fit, but eventually then scaling out a sales team, scaling out a BDR team, because you have confidence now that the product resonates.
Absolutely. I want to come to the product market fit idea and how you define it. But before we do that, if you had to create a checklist for a really good first customer, what would be on that list?
It really depends on the product that you're delivering, I think. But generally, if it is technology, if you are looking to solve a pain in technology, one criteria that would not be on that list would be probably a very large utility.
Excellent.
Because I think when you're venturing into this and establishing that product market fit, especially following funding, all the excitement, one thing that could, let's say, hinder or create tons of headwinds to the momentum right out of securing capital is jumping into trying to pursue a very large customer that is filled with bureaucracy and politics and processes and systems and stakeholders that are so far out of your control. You think you're going to win because you're excited about the message. Hey, I just got capital. I'm backed by these incredible investors. How could you possibly think of saying no? And then before you know it, you're 9 months into it and you've just gotten 20% through the sales pipeline with them. So I would find customers who potentially you've already established a relationship with, you've identified that, they connect with what you're trying to solve. They are generally progressive. So that'd be an important criteria. They might be small to mid-size. And by that, I mean, put a number of service connections on it, probably 8 to 12 plus or minus 1,000 service connections as a utility, if that's your target market, because those utilities are large enough to have budget. They're large enough to have individual heads of departments. So you have discrete stakeholders, and they're small enough though to be able to have decision-making power at your points of contact. That's really, really important. Also, criteria for a customer could be regions. For example, with Sedaru, we learned that the Northeast region could be managed and handled and approached very differently than, say, Southern California or even the Southwest. right? We learned that Colorado was generally, I don't know exactly why, but I think they were ahead of the game with GIS. And over the last 30, 40 years or so, they grew at a faster pace, relatively speaking, than other areas in the country. So they were very advanced technologically. So that region always made kind of an interesting fit with Sedaru. Their GIS was advanced. They knew about systems. They had databases. It wasn't a foreign language. And they were generally willing, ready to take risks. So understanding your regions are also really important. And then you connect that to the product and the problem that you're trying to, that's another thing too, that another important criteria is regionally how each customer base or how each region, what problems they generally solve. So for example, there are certain regions in the Northeast, really old type, really old utilities there. Unlike the Southwest, they don't have issues with drought. They have issues with degrading infrastructure more than anything, and therefore leaks, breaks, things like that occur frequently. In the Southwest, drought is a significant concern, and that's a leading pain. In those utilities, water loss is a key driving buying factor. So understanding your regions, understanding how those regions fare and connect with the problem or the pain and the product that you have in place, and then establish your criteria from there.
Absolutely. I actually want to come back to the product market fit thing later because it's a really, really helpful kind of temporal kind of lens and waypoint in the construction of a really good kind of go-to-market strategy. But before we go to the sort of software in water side of things, if I was to ask you to answer the question, why are utilities great customers? What would you say? Because I think what struck me was when you were talking about this process of kind of like going through, selling to utilities, is that a lot of people from outside water would be like, oh my God, I can't think of anything worse than selling to utilities. It's the worst thing in the world. It's a bad business. And we know that's not true. So if you were to kind of articulate what this kind of relative bull case about working with utilities is, what are your reflections?
Yeah, I mean, first, you might be a little biased because I absolutely love utilities, right?
Me too.
They're such great stewards of the fundamental molecule, and they're so genuine, I believe, very, very truly and deeply genuine about doing the right thing, delivering for their ratepayers, for their customers. I think utilities make great customers because of that, because they are really interested in solving problems for their customers. I think this might sound counterintuitive, but they are not for profit. So because they're not for profit, they don't really get excited. And this might be one of the reasons why typical investors might not be super excited, but they don't get really excited about celebrating profitability, right? But what they do get excited about is productivity. They get excited about succession planning in the databases that they're creating and the products that they're using in preparation for retirement of 50% of their organization in the next 3 years, right? They get really excited in productivity. They get excited in getting more done for their customers. They're also now today, I think, given kind of the gray tsunami and with where utility professionals are, they're very accepting and almost expecting, I would say, of real-time data, use of their databases to make better and more informed decisions. They're really excited and accepting, I think, more and more of using data and accessing products from the cloud, downloading apps from the App Store. So the general acceptance by utilities today is far and above, has exceeded anything that I saw with Sedaru or my previous companies, right? They are at a level now where they're ready to take on technology. They're ready to embrace and apply technology to solve big problems for their customers. And when they do, I think this is the key. When they do, they accept the technology, they apply the product, they demonstrate wins. There's a tremendous kind of word of mouth and referral kind of innate program about how utilities operate. They're so close. It's not uncommon at all that if you have a successful utility customer, you've grown a successful region, word of mouth will start to proliferate. That gets really exciting. And of course, relatively speaking, as hard as it is to get the product in, utilities on the other side, on the flip side, they don't like a whole lot of change. So when you're in with the product, and if you've demonstrated that product market fit, utilities are really troubled. It takes a lot to get removed from that utility. It takes a lot for that utility not to want to renew.
You have to really stuff it up. The other one I love about specifically this point is Charlie Munger, Buffett's late partner, said that everybody hates RFPs. He loved them, absolutely loved them, because everyone else hated them. Because if you get good at RFPs, you win them all. And once you're into to entities that issue RFPs, as you exactly said, like they don't like a whole lot of change. So you can actually underwrite. I mean, you've got to behave yourself and not, deliver the value proposition and all the rest of it. You can underwrite to very, very long lifetime value. So people just renewing, and you can build in, uplift, including inflation, beyond inflation, obviously. And they're very, very happy with it. As long as you deliver, these are really extraordinary customer relationships.
No, I agree. The RFP process is a beast, And early on, I would probably not recommend trying to get involved in that. Back to utilities as a customer.
You will lose.
Utilities are accepting of, generally speaking, early on with Sedaru, a number of our customers were sole source because we were able to identify that ceiling at which they had signing approval to proceed with the product. So you can get in with a utility relatively easy under signing authorities. And just like you said, you can build internally and then at the right time, jump into responding to RFPs. Sedaru had gotten there. And that was an exciting time because we won a fair number of percentage-wise of those RFPs. And when we did, we were able to start larger. We were able to start with more users across the enterprise, which was Sedaru's goal, faster and earlier on, and build out and see that larger recurring revenue to our business.
Let's take a step back. We've successfully gone enormously into the weeds again, which is great. We're going to be getting a whipsaw from going in and out of the weeds, which I love. How do you reflect on how the software world has evolved in water? You've been in this for a good amount of time. You've got as good a perspective on the software world in water than anyone. How do you see its evolution over time? Looking backwards, and then we'll look forward in just a second.
So, looking backwards, it makes me feel old, 20,
You're not
20, 30, well, thank you. 20, 30 years ago, let's say 30 years ago, it was like a bunch of, I think, water tech crusaders, right? Just bring attention to the industry and let everyone know that software could save the world and help optimize large use cases. Back in the day, there was really just Autodesk, Bentley Systems, pursuing engineering, design, and construction, right? There was Hasted Methods and MWH Soft, which was the wholly owned subsidiary of Montgomery Watson Arza Consulting. And both of those Hasted Methods and MWH Soft were pursuing the water wastewater system modeling, or digital twin software, as we call it today. And then, of course, there was Esri, pioneering geospatial technology with GIS. And all of those software vendors, large software vendors, they were delivering software, desktop software based on desktop pricing. And all of that data was backed up on hard drives or local servers, right? We didn't have the cloud. The industry was
in the basement.
Yeah. The industry was operating kind of in silos. Everybody interested about what the other, vendor was doing in their own space, but really, needing to expand their own. And that industry then, 20 years ago even, did not have the ecosystem of partners and investors and accelerators and such that exists today, not even close.
So interesting. So as it develops through time, obviously we've got some really interesting, we think, software positions, a number of whom obviously you've worked with. But as you look forward, we just got the data back from our pipeline in 2024, and a fully kind of 63% of what we saw was in the hard tech side of things. So it does outweigh the software opportunities.
Sure.
But we're at about kind of 55-45 tilted towards software overall. We're slightly heavier into it in Fund 2. But how do you think about the software opportunity going forward? What is it that excites you?
I think the world of software, it's more commercialized than ever, which is great. And I think because of that, there's probably more water software companies today than ever before. We have, as I shared, like an ecosystem of support for software companies that didn't exist before. We have Amazon and Microsoft, kind of standing at the ready to support these software companies, to help them stand up infrastructure, to help them stand up servers, to deploy AI and data lakes. There's so many resources that are available now. I remember 2018, 2017, back then, Sedaru was involved in discussions with Amazon. We were using Amazon Web Services. And even back then, they were interested in working with Sedaru to help deploy some of their artificial intelligence on top of our data and data servers. So I thought it was a little too bleeding edge then, and our customers weren't ready for that. But it shows you even back then, 7-8 years ago, Amazon, Microsoft, servers, data lakes, AI was starting to make its presence known. So I think there's all sorts of opportunities in software because of that, because of climate change being such a macro challenge and so prominent in the day-to-day discussion now. Natural disasters kind of seemingly occurring so much more regularly, unfortunately. So we can run down kind of a few examples of opportunities where I see software market opportunities. And, so one is the large established incumbent providers, for example. There's always going to be the innovator's dilemma, and where it would make it challenging to respond to the market and respond to customers and innovate. So where the large, slow and steady software and technology company exists, there's always that opportunity to disrupt a bit with innovation and agility. There's the efficiency that software can be built with technology today. So as we know, AI is helping smaller companies, or really all companies, be able to roll out software faster, to roll out updates faster. And I think that also makes it possible to pursue markets, smaller markets and market segments that were maybe previously thought of as unattainable because the cost to pursue might have been, the ROI might have been upside down there. So I think these markets might become possible for companies now to pursue because there are just lower costs to scale. So where these companies can be first to a market segment, reminds me of Ziptility within the Burnt Island portfolio. Where these companies might be first to a market segment, they can win there with initially at least less competition, establish their position and define their technology mode, and then differentiate with more responsiveness and closer customer and better customer service. Another opportunity for software companies is in the engineering consulting market. I think it's valued at something like $9 trillion, $12 trillion. And, these markets become available to software companies. These are engineering consultants that operate for profit. So it's in their best interest to optimize profit and differentiate themselves. And also by bringing in technology, establish themselves as thought leaders. So, use cases within engineering consultants could be water master plans, studies that engineers revisit all the time, rate studies, and really any facet of the engineering design and construction process for utilities, which is really their bread and butter. I think it's fair game. There's AI, of course, that portends to be a complete disruptor in most industries. And I think in water, it will be as well, and I think it's not necessarily disrupting the why. We still need to have a very compelling and a large pain to solve and identified and calculated and articulated. But the AI or AI technology certainly allows us to revisit the how and to revisit legacy workflows that the industry might just accept as we've always done it this way. And now with artificial intelligence, we can revisit that. So I'm really curious to see how AI will help produce disruptive products and disruptive companies in our industry, I would say over the next 3 years. There's risk associated with it, of course, but I think companies that approach this by proving out compelling value propositions using differentiating technology with AI while mitigating risk and potentially helping the industry define security policies along the way. I think those are the companies that might help differentiate. It reminds me of Team Solve. Team Solve within the Burnt Island portfolio companies, they're doing just that. They're demonstrating that you can deliver compelling use cases and products to customers using artificial intelligence, and that product market fit exists. You can bring value to a customer, and then those customers will, not necessarily based on artificial intelligence, but the results that are getting produced will renew larger than the initial sale.
Absolutely. I think what it makes me reflect on is that it's so interesting with the advent of, and it's still so nascent within water, with the advent of the kind of AI products, actually what needs to be done doesn't change. It's a medium by which the same stuff gets done faster and more accurately and at higher volumes and allows people to do much, much, much more with less. But I think there's this sort of intrinsic expectation that when people brings up AI, that you're going to have kind of like all of this de novo stuff happening and kind of like the Jetsons are going to be flying around. Sorry, weird reference. But actually, these are just tools. And actually the thing that we look for within AI solutions is this like absolutely relentless and ruthless practicality, that we are just here to stitch your life together in a way that's much, much, much more improved. And I don't think that's any different from anywhere else. People who are using like GitHub's autopilot and all the rest of it, they're just trying to write code more accurately and more quickly.
Yeah. And I think it's a risk too. And I think it's a risk for an early founder to lean in too much on the technology because it really is the how, versus kind of overemphasizing and continuing to impress on the customer. These are the problems we're going to solve. And this is why it's trustworthy and quite credible and believable. And if they ask, when they ask, how is that getting done? To again, not oversell AI, but to also, as much as presenting the how, I would say 55% present how we're mitigating risk and making it secure and comfortable and trustworthy along the way.
Absolutely. When we first invested in Doppler in 2021, I mean, John literally didn't mention they were AI to their customers because they were like, they don't just got used to spreadsheets. What are you going to do? Or run over the nearest hill as soon as you say the words AI? Like, goodbye. No, thank you. I want no part of this.
It's a great example, right? They found that product market fit. They expanded and basically took a market that was previously somewhat underserved and not really appreciated, and building out an incredible business off of that. And if you looked at their messaging, if you looked at their website and the marketing and observed kind of how they sell and pitch the product, I agree with you 1,000%. Very rarely do you hear acronyms AI product.
For sure. So, Paul, that's really helpful. And it's a great group of opportunities. I just feel like if I was to recommend it to them, definitely the consulting engineer, but really just go and look at the sequence in which data travels through a utility. Just go and see all the ways in which that happens. And you are going to come away with a very long list of potential products. It really, really is fascinating. So you, sir, are one of the best practical marketers that I know. Can you just give us a bit of an idea about your kind of marketing and sales philosophy? And we've touched on a bit at the earlier stage, so no need to sort of retrade ground, but anything else you want to add for kind of the early founders, up to that stage of kind of product market fit? What do you think that they need to be spending the most time doing? How do you think about advising them?
Yeah, I think establishing that product market fit is so important. And I would lead with that over allocating too much budget and resources to marketing. Because, I shared, you market, you talk about everything that you are, but you don't have enough points quite yet. So
yeah,
I think practical marketing is the only way to run until you've identified that EMF. And, the beginning, every dollar is so critical, and prioritizing product, becoming real and becoming what you said it would and said it could, I think is really important for investors, really important for the board. It is so meaningful to establish that connection with consumers. I think how you present and how you walk through the sales pipeline, especially early on, can't be underestimated or understated with how important it is to listen and how important it is to document and to accept and incorporate that feedback into your product, and then to relay that back to the customer to let them know that they're now part of it. It's in building that, I think that's when the momentum starts to get created. And then that's when you start to feel confident in the product that you built. And you can test that a lot, quite a bit, relatively cost effectively. You can bring in BDRs, for example. That's another approach, one or two. Start testing messaging like A/B testing and calculating what resonates, what's not, which message is taking us farther down the sales pipeline funnel. And then when we get to a marketing or a sales qualified lead, what are the obstacles that are stopping us right there? And then to understand why. Maybe it's pricing, right? I know early on with Sedaru, we did a lot of calibration around pricing. We were trying to identify, of course, where our competitors landed. We were trying to find pricing that was commensurate with the benefit that we were delivering to our customers. And we were trying to find pricing that wasn't the least expensive, because we really wanted our customers, every time it came time to renewal, to have to justify it at least a little bit. Because then with every renewal, we were validated that we were on the right track. But then we didn't want a product that was too expensive because we needed to sell. So finding that kind of value in the pricing is also really important too. And kind of I think, overlooked aspect of product market fit too, because you can sometimes undersell the product and then you're ending up in a position where you have a lot of customers, but you're not really generating enough revenue to support growth.
Yeah, the pricing iteration one is, again, it was part of at the beginning of this month, is that you've just got to relentlessly test it all the time, because people's willingness to pay changes as you develop. When you're early and risky and kind of like nobody will, okay, yeah, you got to get underneath the ceiling. But as you become kind of embedded in operations and you can be able to have those reference customers, like people treat it way more fixed than they do. It really is. I mean, it's an old venture adage of just raise prices. The idea is just to find that effective kind of like pricing possibility frontier, like exactly what do your elasticity curves look like. Sometimes they can be nasty surprises, but actually it's really beneficial to know where the edges are. It's a really good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep testing it.
Yeah. Paul, how do you define product market fit?
Aside from gross margins.
Aside from gross margins. Exactly. Heresy.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure.
I think we define gross margins by we define product market fit by not necessarily the initial sale. I think we define product market fit by the product getting sold. And then I say not the initial sale because, if a founder, for example, has very close relationships, if a founder, for example, is underselling the product, in other words, getting the product in very easily, you can do that. You can do that anytime. So you can sell a product, you can get into a customer side, but then really understanding and tracking and monitoring and supporting and even advocating for the customer as they're using the product, testing usage, understanding that the value proposition that you initially thought might actually be different because the products used or the customers using the product may be even slightly different, right? So understanding that journey as the customer applies the product and as it proliferates, kind of gets around the organization, and documenting that, understanding that, refining the messaging around that, and being there throughout the customer deployment, throughout the customer usage, understanding basic customer usage at a high level is really important also. So after the initial sale, understanding how frequently the customer is accessing, how long they're spending in the app once they're in, how many unique customers are accessing the app at any given time, at any given week. And, if you can build like the tentacles or the nerves within the product to understand what buttons they're doing, or even what events they might be triggering within the application, now you get a sense of their behavior. So participating in that deployment, participating in that usage of the customer, and refining and iterating along with them until you get to the renewal. And there's a good chance that if you've taken this approach, if you've taken this step with your early customers, even if you hadn't figured it out 100%, the customer will know that you're in it for them and you're completely intent on solving their problem. And there's a good chance that they might ring you anyway and give you one more chance. Ideally, you've addressed that already. And now the customer sees themselves not only as part of the journey, but hey, I've got a product in my hand that is really solving some problems. And then it goes without question that they would renew and even upsell with more users at that point.
You're a pretty serious operator, but through us, you've been sort of found yourself on the advisor side of things, and obviously beyond us as well. Novel Water does a whole bunch of different things, but what most strikes you about being on the advisor side, trying to help these operators operate? What's been most surprising for you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's been a pleasure and so exciting working with these CEOs. I think what's been most surprising is the challenge and therefore the opportunity, I think, to observe and bring balance and emphasis on priorities for the CEO and the visionary. We touched on earlier the excitement of launch and the excitement, I think, of maybe recognizing or maybe even just feeling more comfortable initially of operating the business at a higher level. I think I love visioning and operating at a high level, as much as anybody, maybe even more than most, but I guess the practical operator in me, recognizes the requirement to create those kind of proof points with customers wherever possible and make what we're talking about, make what we're marketing real. So the company can stay excited about the vision and what could be grounded with a reality of what it actually takes to execute, because both are needed. That's what surprises me most is the challenge. And it's also the opportunity of balancing CEOs and bringing to that operator execution perspective, prioritizing customers first, prioritizing turning the vision into an executed reality is really exciting to me.
Absolutely. Now, it's been really fantastic to watch you work. Paul, I've got quite a few more questions that we didn't get to. No. Maybe in a few months we can do a part two. But we've got to our final question that we ask all of our guests. So if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
I think that we've touched on it now a few times, and it's so important to underscore on what I like to call that customer inclusion loop. If you're going to scale anything early on, make that customer inclusion loop repeatable. It's not just listening to a customer, but it's how you listen. It's how you incorporate those learnings and customer feedback. It's how you negotiate with customers around the product plan. because sometimes you need to say no if that feature request is so far beyond the product plan, outside of what you envisioned for the product, that it's not going to do the general user base good. You need to demonstrate to your customer that their input was important enough to include, and everyone benefits, I think, from that experience. And when the customer's immortalized in the product, like it or not, I think they have a much higher likelihood of participating in the next buying cycle, the next upsell, the next cross-sell. And then we start to grow together. And you repeat that loop, you build customer relationships, and based on strengthening trust and bringing value and momentum. And I think you get a lot of fulfillment out of that. And I'd like to believe revenue would follow as well.
I love that. That's fantastic. The customer inclusion loop. I think we have an episode title.
I like it. There's an acronym there.
Paul, just really appreciate it. This is such a fun conversation. You're always so brilliant to talk to, and you've been of such great assistance to all of the companies that you've worked with in the BIV portfolio. They speak so highly of you, and obviously now anybody who listens to this episode can see why. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated you coming on The Fundamental Molecule.
Likewise, Tom. Thanks so much. It's been such a pleasure. You're a gracious host, and it's been a blast to participate. Thank you.
Fantastic. We'll see you soon.